Hello, welcome to day 63. We are in Numbers chapters 34 to 36 today and Mark chapter 11. So, in Numbers, we get a definition of the borders of the promised land, the land that God promised to give to the Israelites after leading them out of Egypt. He goes through the instructions on how to divide up this land among the 12 tribes and which people from each tribe are going to be in charge of this process. The Levites, remember, are the priestly class. It's one of the tribes, and they're in charge of taking care of the religious rituals and the spiritual life of the community. They do not get land as a tribe because they're going to be separated and spread across all of the land and all of the tribes in order to serve everyone. So part of the instructions include information on which towns the Levites are going to get to live in and the land that they will have to be able to raise enough crops and animals for their own livelihood. Now, there's one other interesting thing that's put into this section, and this is the concept of sanctuary cities or asylum cities. So there were a certain number of towns that were set aside that if someone accidentally killed someone else in the United States today, this would be the crime of manslaughter, where someone has died through your action, but it was not intentional, it was not premeditated, it was an accident. So asylum cities are sanctuaries where these people can go to have sanctuary, where they will not be killed and they will not be harmed while their case is being adjudicated. Now, there's some details in here about when they can leave safely and so forth. There's a lot of granular details in all of this, but there's several rules to follow as to what counts as a manslaughter accidental death. Once again, as you're going through here, realize that, just talking about accidental deaths, there's like 6 or 8 different things, stipulations for them to follow. Remember, living together in community is complicated and it's messy. All the times that we wish that life were just simple, we have to realize that none of us are simple. And we have a gracious God that recognizes that He made us as complicated people. And they, know that all of us living together is going to be messy and complicated. And so there are a lot of different rules and regulations as we go through here. And when we're struggling with the rules and regulations in our lives today, we need to just take a deep breath and realize this is how life is. We hear again about Zelophehad's daughters. They had been back, they first showed up in chapter 27 requesting land because their father had died before they had gotten married and they had no brothers, which meant that once they got to the promised land, they would have nothing to live on. They had no one to care for them. They were orphans and they had nowhere to belong. And so God and Moses agreed that they would get their father's share. Now, in this section, people are like, okay, so what if they go off and marry someone from another tribe? We're going to have problems if we have little bits of land belonging to different tribes all over the place. So then the rule came down that you could only marry within your own tribe so that all of the land given to your tribe stays with the tribe. Congratulations, you are now done with the book of Numbers. I have just a couple final thoughts here. A lot of time we talk about not wanting to count numbers, that numbers aren't as important as people. And here's a book where we're frequently counting stuff as we go through this book. I think there's a couple things for us to take from this. One, it's clear from this book that it's important to know your people. They counted everyone so they knew how many people they had, how many people were connected to each other, how many people were in each tribe. They knew all their people because they had counted all of their people. By counting all their people, they also made sure that they cared for all of their people. They knew how much food they needed. They knew how much land they needed. No one was left out. Even when some situation went against tradition, such as the daughters of Mr. Z, they figured out a way to make sure that everyone was cared for, everyone was taken care of, everyone had enough. Another big thing here is we are reminded we've got to stop complaining. God does not like it when we complain, and we really need to stop complaining. And the final thing that I think is important to take from this is the value of working together. Some of the tribes decided to take some land east of the Jordan, but they promised to still work with the other tribes to get the land west of the Jordan for the Israelites to live on and use. They worked together through tough times. Living together in the wilderness was not easy, and they stuck together and they figured out ways to work together. In Mark, we have Jesus entering Jerusalem on the back of a donkey colt. Now, for some of us, we have heard this story a million times on Palm Sunday. And, Jesus and the donkey, blah, 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 blah. But the thing to remember here is that Jesus is entering Jerusalem, and with people cheering him on as he's entering the city, this is more like a victorious general coming home after a battle, or an important leader, the governor, coming to visit a city. The response that Jesus is getting is something that Roman officials get. It is not something that wandering itinerant teacher preacher guys get, who are dusty from walking roads from town to town. But the thing is, coming in on a donkey colt really changes the story here, because all those other people would have come in on a powerful stallion, a horse that was tall and stately, or they would have come in on a beautiful chariot or a beautiful carriage of some sort. Jesus is not about prestige. Jesus is not about power. Jesus is about giving hope to people who have no hope. And I think that's an important thing to remember as we read this story. Then we get this funny little story about Jesus cursing the fig tree. And a lot of us really struggle with this because it's not the right season for figs to be available to eat. So, how unfair is Jesus to be cursing a tree out of season for not providing fruit that it can't provide because it's not in season? Once again, we have one of these bookend stories where we have this fig tree and then we have another story, and we'll get back to the fig tree in a minute. But this other story is one that a lot of people are familiar with, of Jesus going into the temple and throwing over all of the tables of the little businesses, the money changers, the people selling animals for sacrifice. And Jesus is saying that he wants his house to be a house of prayer. This has been applied in a lot of different ways, but I think the core thing for us to remember is the money changers weren't just like in the lobby of the temple. They were actually in the worship space. They were in the Gentiles' court. There were three courts that people could go into. There was one for Jewish men, one for Jewish women, and one for everyone who wasn't Jewish, but who wanted to worship God. And it was the biggest court. It was the outside court. You walk through that to get to the other courts. And so they had set up there because that's where there was a lot of space. But by being there, they were loud, they were noisy, and they were interrupting the prayer of the non Jewish people who believed in God and wanted to honor God with their worship. So I think one of the things for us to think about with this story is not so much is the youth group selling light bulbs or butter braid pastries for their next um, you know mission trip outing, but rather, where is it being done? What time is it being done? Is it interrupting someone else's time of prayer and worship? Back to the fig tree. Jesus gives a little bit more of an explanation here, and he talks about our need to embrace the God life, to be connected to God through everything in our life, and that we should be praying for everything in our life, big stuff, little stuff, whatever it is, take it to God in prayer. Jesus is like, God is open all the time. He is always listening. Bring everything to God, even if it seems impossible. So this is the part that ties back to the fig tree. I still feel badly for the fig tree, but we are to ask for help, and we are to pray for the ability to forgive others who have hurt us. So if we think of ourselves as the fig tree, we may be thinking, oh, I can't do that. I'm too young. I'm too old. I'm in the wrong place. I don't have enough money. I'm not, I don't have enough power. I don't have enough influence. I don't have enough whatever. And Jesus is like, yeah, you're not a fig tree. You have the power of God. Use prayer, tap into God's power, and you can bear fruit in any season of your life through the power of the Holy Spirit being with you. Next, we have this little thing about the credentials. The Pharisees are still badgering Jesus. Who gave you the authority to do this? What are your credentials? Show me your diploma. Show me your license, we would say today. And so I was wondering, what does it take for us to believe? What do we keep asking God to prove to us before we're going to believe? Are we trying also then to fit Jesus into our own agendas and worldview, or are we willing to change to fit into the way of Jesus? That's a big thing that the Pharisees had going on here. The Pharisees were so adamant that they were going to be perfectly obedient to the letter of every part of Moses' law that they couldn't open themselves up to the fact that Moses maybe didn't cover everything, and that maybe the application of Moses' law over time had gotten a little out of alignment with God's plan, and they just couldn't open themselves up to what Jesus was trying to explain to them. The Pharisees in this case knew they were trapped, and they tried to say, well, I don't know, as a way of getting out of the whole thing, and Jesus saw through that. But I think the real question is, are we acting like Pharisees today? Do we have some idea of how things should be, and we're trying to get everything to fit into that, instead of opening ourselves up to God's ever widening mercy and see how God is working in the world today, perhaps in new ways that we don't expect? Hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time.